Welcome to another episode of Daily Airline News focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
Thank you, Richard. Now, viewers, this episode is called It's Official or Not. It's episode 256. And we're back to our episode about outsiders solving air crashes, which was in relationship to a number of questions that you viewers asked about why we are doing what we are doing, and maybe we should wait for the preliminary report, or the final report, I should say, to come out. And we have countered that by pointing out the large number of air crashes where outsiders have solved it, and either before the official investigation comes to its conclusion or afterwards they have overturned the official investigation. Now we're going to have another different tact at this. What happens when the officials involved in the investigation do not agree with each other? That's another question. So our title, is it official or not? So from PHST Die, the Silk Air crash still sends shivers down my spine. At the very time of the crash, I was waiting at Changi Airport for my wife and 18-month-old son on a Silk Air 737 flight from Cebu in the Philippines. Scary to think that the captain of the Jakarta flight to Singapore might have been piloting my wife and son's flight. It's the human suffering of such incidents that can all too easily get overlooked. Chilling, Richard, and I guess similar thoughts went through your head when you heard about Air France 447.
Yeah, indeed. The Silk Air investigation was formally disputed. The NTSC in Indonesia said the cause is undetermined, and the NTSB in the USA said it was an intentional pilot action. And the NTSB rebutted, argued a number of points in a 48-page analysis. The dive profile was only consistent with deliberate flight control inputs. The dual recorders stopped, and that was almost certainly caused by cockpit action. And no evidence supported the NTSC's suggestion of a rudder malfunction. And human factors and financial findings were relevant but underplayed by the NTSC in Indonesia. And the NTSB in the US concluded the crash was intentional. And I have to sympathize. Sometimes it's actually worse waiting at the airport for loved ones to arrive than being on the plane yourself. And a close escape has a marked effect on the situation. When I heard about Air France 447 crashing in the Atlantic, I was quite numb. The next time I got on a plane, I was quite nervous. The next flight I took was a Lufthansa flight from Sao Paulo to Frankfurt, and I had flown that route many times, and it should have been routine. And I knew very well every time you cross the equator and the intertropical convergence zone, there's a belt of low pressure that always causes turbulence near the equator. It's where the northeast and the southeast trade winds meet. And I knew we would have turbulence because it happened every time. And we always finished dinner and cleared away the plates and glasses before we got to the equator. And the pilots could see the weather radar, and they always announced in advance that we're about to enter an area of turbulence, and please return to your seat and strap in. And I had so many air miles, because I was doing it so often, I could get an upgrade to first class. And you can have several glasses of champagne. And when you hit the turbulence or thunderstorms, somehow on that day, it didn't help at all. I normally quite enjoy turbulence. I sort of sit back and think I'm on a Big Dipper ride at the fairground. But that day I was not so brave, I can promise you.
Mm, absolutely. And likewise, I've actually missed out on a Catalina flying boat trip, and just by an hour or two, and all the folks on board perished. So another escape. So I do have a little bit of a sense of that as well, Richard.
Yeah,
Mm. Now, at Jeff Toll 604, I think he hits the nail on the head with this comment. It's almost like there needs to be another agency investigating the air crash investigators. Richard, I think we've discussed this a few times.
yeah. And that is why the ICAO insists on the separation of the national regulator and the National Air Accident Investigation organizations. And the Indian authorities signed up to ICAO, but they don't adhere to the ICAO rules. And so, in this case, the Indian Supreme Court are being asked to step in.
And we should also mention that in the current investigation of Air India 171, we've mentioned this before, but the NTSB and the AAIB of the United Kingdom both threatened to leave the investigation. So obviously, things are not smooth in there.
Indeed, they're not smooth.
No. Now, Richard, Michael Campen recalls, I remember a film with James Stewart when he solved an air crash due to stress fractures. I'm sorry, the name of the film escapes me. Richard, have you seen
Yeah,
that one?
no, I missed that one. But Geoffrey, I think you've seen it, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I'm surprised you haven't seen that. It's a terrific film. It's a rank organisation, great black and white British flick. It was called No Highway in the Sky, adapted from the novel by the famous author Neville Shute. In fact, his name is Neville Shute Norway, and he was in fact an aeronautical engineer whose speciality was stress analysis. And he co-founded the Airspeed aircraft company in the United Kingdom after working with de Havilland and Vickers. The film also starred Marlene Dietrich and Glennis Johns and Jack Hawkins. It's a great film. So, if those of you who have not watched it, including Richard, um, go see it.
Okay, take your
Now,
advice.
yeah, no, it's a good film. And Hugo Miller, 1025. There was also the infamous BEA crash in the 50s that killed the England football team. Well, it killed some of them. Captain Thane was blamed for trying to take off with ice on the wings. He was also fired, I think, in fact, he was, because he was sitting in the right seat against regulations. Captain Thane himself, I believe, established that the cause was slush on the runway and that caused the crash. The Bristol engines that were powering the aircraft gave a little bit of trouble, necessitating a slightly reduced throttle setting for takeoff, resulting in a longer takeoff roll, and the aircraft ran into some slush further down the runway. I'm giving this from memory, so I apologise if some of the details are inaccurate, but the principle is correct. Richard, I can answer this one as well if you like.
Yeah,
This was a
please do.
yeah, this was a double tragedy for the 23 people who died in the crash and for Captain James Thane. On February 6, 1958, Thane was the pilot in command of the Airspeed 57 Ambassador flying out of Munich. The aircraft was carrying the Manchester United football team back from a match in Yugoslavia. He was blamed by the German investigators for not de-icing the wings, but Thane was adamant that he'd checked and there was no ice. He was then sacked by BEA, but then he started a 10-year battle to clear his name. And interestingly enough, Richard, he was aided by his wife Ruby, who happened to be a scientist, and used her expertise to show that the ice was not the reason. In fact, some of her tests were carried out on a biscuit tin lid in the back garden, as well as a freezer room at a butcher's. So it wasn't with the help of some scientific organisation. However, a second inquiry in Germany in 65 again blamed the pilot after refusing to accept any new evidence from the witnesses. And it wasn't until 1969 that the British Prime Minister Harold Wilson intervened and he ordered an investigation. It concluded that slush, not ice, almost certainly doomed the BEA Flight 609 in Munich on a refuelling stop while carrying the Manchester football team back from a successful European Cup game in Belgrade. Blame is not imputed to Captain Thane, the new British report stated. Stephen Moran, author of the Munich air disaster and an aviation historian, said that Captain Thane was hung out to dry. He said the stress took its toll and probably played a part in his eventual early death at 57. Mr. Moran added in a new UK news report that if it wasn't for Thane's single-mindedness fighting so hard to clear his name for so many years, the true cause would never have been established. Without doubt, he prevented another Munich. But after the war, there were political reasons for not damaging relations with Germany, so he stood almost alone in his fight. He was a convenient scapegoat. And as we approach the anniversary of that tragic crash, that'll be in 2028, perhaps it's time for the German authorities to recognise that he wasn't to blame. What are your thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, oh, that would be a very good gesture
Mm,
after such a long battle, and
mm,
even after the tragic early death of Captain Thane.
yeah, yeah. So Jim Parr, 01 YouTube, is there a way to prevent obfuscation of vital information, whatever the source, from corrupting the truth? I appreciate that your own efforts, Richard and Geoffrey, are a huge influence in respect of countering this intractable problem with aircraft accidents. While I am thinking, as I ask this question of you, that I'm trying to roll a 1 ton rock uphill by hand, I would appreciate any comments you may have about the procedural methods or global oversight bodies that seem to fail due to what seems to be outside pressure to find what they are instructed to find. As a New Zealander, I was particularly appalled at the protracted nonsense surrounding the Erebus disaster. Justice Mahon could be considered the 238th fatality of this accident investigation fiasco. I was delighted to listen to your statements about what you are doing and why you are doing it. And Richard, in respect of the new MH370 search mission, I sincerely hope that your insights via the WISPA research result in a successful location of the aircraft's final resting place. Richard.
Yeah, well, that's very kind. And we hope too that MH370 will be found eventually, and after all these many years. I'm a firm believer that the truth will always come out in the end, but sometimes you have to wait a long time. And the families of those lost on MH370 have been waiting 11 years already. There is clearly a place for independent investigators. On MH370, the ATSB report, the operational search for MH370, it's called, has a section on external contributions, and that mentions the independent group, as well as 9 people by name, including mine. And Ocean Infinity, who are going out to search again in the coming months, also acknowledge publicly several universities and the independent group, as well as 3 people by name, including mine.
Mm,
So there is quite a clear track record with MH370 for independent investigators to play a role. Obviously, the official investigation is the most important, but we've seen a lot of trouble with the official investigation owning up to the factual evidence. And we have to keep pushing. It's perhaps yeah, a long-standing problem on the MH370 investigation over 11 years, but as we've shown, we've gone back over several other investigations and gone on even longer in some cases.
And we've also highlighted too that the Malaysians have been very reluctant and completely disinterested to actually collect the debris that's been picked up by people like our colleague Blaine Gibson and others. And you're thinking that's absolutely perplexing because the smallest piece of debris could be the missing link that you're looking for, but they aren't interested in collecting it. So
Yeah, I get the sense that the Malaysian authorities are long since no longer active on this investigation, but officially it is supposed to be still ongoing.
it is. Now, this is an interesting one, Richard. We missed this one, and we're happy to acknowledge that. And Eric sent this in by email to remind us. A major crash that you missed is Arrow Air Flight 1285R, which occurred on the 12th of December 1985 at Gander International Airport, Newfoundland. It was carrying 248 passengers and 8 crew members. It is the worst accident, aviation accident, on Canadian soil. The Canadian Aviation Safety Board, CASB, investigated the crash, and in a report signed by 5 of its 9 board members, put the cause to icing, while 4 of the 9 members of the CASB dissented, issuing a minority opinion asserting there was no evidence presented proving that ice had been present on the leading edges, such as the wings, and the minority report speculated an in-flight fire that may have resulted from detonations of undetermined origin brought about the catastrophic system failures. Now, Les Philotas wrote a book about this called Improbable Cause, Deceit and Dissent in Investigation of America's Worst Military Air Disaster. And I might just add for a minute there that Les was actually one of the minority dissenters on this investigation. In response, our colleague says, in response to a lack of confidence in accident investigations by the CASB, the Government of Canada shut the board down in 1990, replacing it with an independent multimodal investigative agency, the Transport Safety Board of Canada. And this one was a fascinating one. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've read the full report and the dissenting opinion. It took 3 years for the official report to be published in 1988, and a year later, the dissenting opinion was published by 4 out of the 9 investigators, as you say. And then a former Supreme Court Justice, Willard Esty, reviewed the full record and concluded the evidence did not prove either theory, and not from the official or from the dissenting opinion. And he also said that a further inquiry wouldn't likely help. So he returned the verdict, cause unknown. And the investigation remains inconclusive up to today. And it's still the same, as Eric points out. The vote was 5-4 in the original investigation. So the official 118-page report stands, and the 24-page dissenting opinion is put on one side. And I find that quite fascinating. The official report states the aircraft stalled due to wing ice, and that the wrong takeoff reference speeds were used, the V1, VR, V2, and the takeoff weight calculation was incorrect. The minority opinion said no de-icing was required and the aircraft did not stall. And it says the correct takeoff reference speeds were used and the actual takeoff speeds from the FDR data aligned with the correct takeoff reference speeds. And the takeoff weight, they agree, was out by 14,000 pounds, but it was still within the maximum allowable weight for that aircraft, that runway, and the weather conditions at the time. And I actually agree with the minority opinion, and I find the CASB official report actually quite incompetent. Justice Esty is technically correct that the exact cause is not proven in either case, but I find it amazing that the official findings ignored the terrorist threat, explosion, and fire on takeoff. There were 248 US military personnel returning from a tour of duty in the Sinai Desert, and the Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for the terrorist attack and the explosion on board. And at the time, the US government were negotiating with the Islamic Jihad for the release of 6 US hostages. A large number of eyewitnesses were interviewed and consistently reported a fire, and some reported an explosion just after takeoff. Some witness accounts were left out of the official report, but they were included in the minority dissenting report. And evidence of an explosion from the wreckage was dismissed by the official report, but further evidence was included in the minority report. The captain had set his reference speed, V2, to 172 knots, and the FDR records the aircraft reached 172 knots after takeoff. And the weight and balance calculation was used for setting the horizontal stabilizer. That was set at 5.3 degrees, according to the calculation. It was actually set at 5.85 degrees, a little bit more, with a bit of a safety margin. And it all adds up that the pilots were doing their job very well and correctly. And the aircraft stall speed, according to the manufacturer in these conditions and weight, would have been 148 knots. So they weren't anywhere near the stall speed. And the investigation found that all 4 engines were running at the time of the impact. But they also found there was a major hydraulic failure and a major electrical failure. And in fact, all 4 thrust reversers had deployed, and the flaps had changed from the 18-degree setting for takeoff, and some were retracted down to 5 degrees, and others fully extended to 50 degrees. And that caused the aircraft to veer off 30 degrees to the right. The minority report concluded there was a simultaneous multiple system failure due to a common cause, and that common cause was most likely an explosion in the checked baggage in the hold. And the official report relied on simulations and models and extrapolations of data and what-if considerations, but the minority report relied on empirical evidence and calculations from first principles. So in this case, I'm with the minority opinion.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, if they're blaming icing in the official report, but yet four thrust reversers deployed, the flaps changed with the numbers you've given, that's nothing to do with icing at all.
Nah.
It's
And that all got pushed on one side because they were fixated on icing as being the cause. And it just simply wasn't the case. So there's certainly no proof, as Justice Esty pointed out, of that official statement.
yeah. So, viewers, that these accidents that we have just referred to again reinforce while we are pursuing Air India Flight 171 and the truth as to why this aircraft crashed. We find the preliminary report, as we have already said numerous times, we find that it's got faults, and we have already published our plausible hypothesis and our root cause, and we will continue to pursue this. So, Richard, thank you very much indeed for the work you've done on this episode today.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah. And viewers, we'll be back tomorrow with more on the Air India Flight 171. And then on Saturday, we have another special guest for you. And I know you're going to enjoy this one, just as you enjoyed Captain Kevin Sullivan yesterday. And there's lots of questions for Captain Sullivan, who is going to be back with us next week. So please do tune in tomorrow and again on Saturday. So, Richard, all from us today, and we'll be back tomorrow.
Yes, indeed.
So, viewers, please do subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming, and please do keep those great questions coming. Thank you very much indeed.